No KJ Adams, but Kansas will look to take down TCU. We preview the Jayhawks and the Horned Frogs on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. On today's edition of LOJ, we're going to be going over a TCU preview, getting into our top headlines of the game, our TCU scouting report, our matchups of the game, players to watch, and so much more, as KU will be without KJ Adams. Obviously, an interesting matchup with Ernest Udeh, a former Jayhawk, going up against Hunter Dickinson, the guy who was brought in to kind of replace him. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Kansas takes on TCU, 6 o'clock tip, happening in Fort Worth. Road game for KU on a Wednesday night action. I feel like it's been like 8 years since KU last played. Maybe it's because there was all that NFL action in between. There was the College Football National Championship Monday night, then you had Tuesday. It felt like so long since KU has last played, you know? But they're going to be playing in this one again with no KJ Adams, even despite the fact that it's been 10 years since their last game. KJ is not healthy between now and the last game. But Bill Self said on a recent Hawk Talk that he expects him to be out. I think it was 3 to 5 games, 3 to 4 games. I forget the exact number, but I know 3 was the first number in it. So if you would include the K-State game as the first one of those, then that would mean TCU would be second. That would mean Houston would be third. And then you're looking at, is he out another week past that point? But certainly out tonight. What does that mean? How does that affect the matchup? We'll get into that here in a moment. Also, the other headlines for this one: Kansas trying to bounce back on the road because they did lose their most recent road game. But before that, we're starting to show some positive signs in playing better on the road, winning their last 2 at Cincinnati, and prior to that at UCF in kind of a walloping win for KU. So can they get back to playing well on the road and just kind of trying to stay within striking distance of the top of the league? If they want to win the Big 12, they got serious work to do this week, right? Winning on the road at TCU and then beating Houston, who's currently undefeated in Big 12 play. Those two things would go a long way in you remaining in this Big 12 title race, because right now you have 2 losses, Houston has 0, right? So you have to kind of keep up with the Joneses, and that doesn't even include the teams in front of you like Arizona and Iowa State, for instance. From TCU's perspective, they're trying to build up some momentum. Like, they just won at Baylor. If they get a win over Kansas at home after they won at Baylor, they're going to feel like they're headed in the right direction, especially from their NCAA tournament chances. I mean, right now they're sitting with 7 losses on the season. They need to start winning some games if they want to make the NCAA tournament. So on the season, you look at the TCU scouting report, they come in at 10-7 on the year. They're 3-3 in Big 12 play, and there's 3 wins over Big 12 opponents. They had a 1-point victory over Kansas State, which was an ugly game, 63-62. They beat BYU by 4 points, and then they won at Baylor, that most recent game, by 3. The losses, it came at Arizona by 9 points, certainly a respectable loss there. At Houston, respectable team to lose to, but lost by 19, got blown out. And then they lost at home against Utah, who is not expected to be super good this year, but has snuck up on a couple teams in the early going, and they lost that one by 8. Now, you think about TCU the past couple of years, and I think it's been interesting. Jamie Dixon, their head coach, the past couple of seasons, I would really say the past like 3 seasons, when they had like Mike Miles and some of these different guards, like they were a really athletic team that had a lot of lengthy wings. They would crash the glass. They'd play tough defense, and they would really play a physical brand of basketball that was athletic, that was speed-based. Well, this team is different than that, and I think some of the TCU teams that were before those recent 3 years of play for them were different than that too, and it feels like this is kind of another style shift for them. This is a team that's playing really slow. Like, they don't get out in transition as much, right? They're a little bit slower with this year's team. The personnel, they have a 6'2" guard in Vaishon Alette. He is averaging 11.5 points, 1.2 steals per game. He is really struggling offensively. I know he's averaging 11.5 points per game, but he's only shooting 39% from the floor and only 26% from 3. So he's not somebody who typically is going to score points at a very efficient number. Then you have Noah Reynolds, who's a 6'3" guard, and he is somebody who can score them an efficient number. He had a 21-point game against BYU. He had a 23-point game against Arizona. And basically the games where he's shooting threes well, like he's a 32, 33% three-point shooter. So he's a decent three-point shooter, but he's not like a great three-point shooter. But in the games where he does shoot threes well, both those games he hit 3 threes. He was 3-5, 3 of 6 from 3. He's able to go off. He has some other parts of his game that allow him, when he's shooting threes well, he can kind of go off. So that'll be something to watch in this one. They have a 6'6" wing in Trezarian White, only 185 pounds, from North Carolina Wilmington. He got like 20 a game last year before transferring in. He's averaging like 9.5 points per game, 1.4 steals per game, and he's shot it well from 3, about 37% from 3 so far this season. Brendan Wenzel is 6'8". He's like 215 pounds. He's kind of a 3-4 man who plays the 4 for them. He just had a really good game against Baylor, 17-5 for him. On the season, he averages 9 points, 3.5 rebounds, and he is shooting like 46% from 3-point range. So honestly, in a game without KJ Adams, maybe more reason to even play a guard to guard him at the 4 could make even more sense, knowing that their 4-man and Wenzel can shoot threes at a very high rate. Then you look at the center position for TCU. Obviously, everybody will recognize the name of Ernest Udeh, 6'11", 260-pound junior. He is getting about 8 points, over 8 rebounds per game. He's also averaging 1.5 steals and 1.7 blocks per game, and that's in 28 minutes per game. He's also shooting 61% from the floor. So he hasn't been, this dynamic offensive player, but he's rebounding well. He's defending very well. He's kind of, getting into that form of what you expected him to be, this rim running, defending big man. He'll also rotate out for 6'9", 230-pound freshman Malik Diallo. They also will use a 6'6" wing in Micah Robinson, who's got good size, 37% from 3. They've got, speaking of good size, 6'7", 245-pound David Punch, which is a perfect last name for him. Just to institute, like, he's this tough player, gets a good rebounding numbers. And then they have 2 pieces who have kind of struggled shooting but might play, 6'8", Isaiah Manning, and 6'5", Jace Posey. Now, what they've done well so far this season for TCU, they have a top 30 defense, according to Ken Palm's defensive efficiency. They've been good at forcing steals. They've been good at turning opposing teams over. So Kansas has to be strong with the basketball. They don't send teams to the free throw line very much. That is a good kind of mix to have, where if you're getting steals but not fouling the line, I guess it's not sending teams to the free throw line. So they might be fouling on reach-ins, but it's not sending them to the free throw line at the very least. One thing that's interesting, though, teams have only shot 29.5% from three-point range against TCU this season, but they've given up a lot of attempts. And typically when you look at it and it's like, oh, a team is doing a good job, defending the three-point line, one of the big ways you see that is that, oh, but they're not giving up many threes, right? Which usually correlates with, hey, if you're not giving up as many threes, there are probably not as many open threes you're not giving up. And also, like, you're doing a good job emphasizing that on the defensive end. The fact they're giving up a lot of three-point attempts tells me that teams are getting open ones against them, a good variety. They just haven't gone down. And the other thing I typically look at when I'm like, okay, a team is doing a good job defending the three-point line, or the three-point percentage against them is bad, is do they have a lot of length? Do they have the ability to challenge a lot of shots? Because if you challenge three-point shots with a lot of length, that's going to help. Well, 6'2" guard, 6'3" guard, I guess 6'6" on the wing, 6'8" on the wing. I don't know. It's not like that unearthly. So there is a part of me that wonders if TCU at some point here is going to be due for a negative reversion to the mean on their defensive three-point numbers, that teams are going to start shooting well from 3 against them. And I bring that up as well because it feels like Kansas is due for some good three-point shooting themselves. They did pretty well against Kansas State, but Kansas on the season is only shooting like 28% from three-point range in Big 12 only games. And you might not think Kansas is that good of a three-point shooting team. They're still better than that, right? Like last year, they were not a good three-point shooting team. They're still shooting like 33% from 3. So there is a reversion to the mean coming at some point here for Kansas from three-point range. Does it happen in one game? Does it happen over the stretch of 3 weeks where they just shoot above average and it rises up, right? I don't know. But I do wonder if this could be a reversion to the mean game for both sides where it kind of comes together. That'll be something interesting to watch. Now, when you look at TCU, what they do well offensively, they're solid at not turning it over on that end. I would say they're above average in offensive rebounding, so not quite as elite as where they have been in years past, but they're still at least, fine at it. And then in Big 12 only games, they are hitting their threes. They're 34.7% from three-point range in Big 12 only games. That is the 3rd best in Big 12 play. Now, what TCU struggles with offensively overall on the season, they're ranked outside the top 150. So they have really struggled on the offensive end. They've been a bit better in Big 12 play, though, going back to that three-point shooting. They have not been a good two-point shooting team. They're shooting under 49% on two-point shots this season. They are also one of the 15 worst teams in the country in free throw shooting percentage. So they're not capitalizing when they get to the free throw line. They're not shooting twos well either. So they really have to shoot threes well, which again, they have in Big 12 play, but it's a little bit tougher to rely on that when your overall sample size this season says that hasn't as much been the case. Defensively, like I said, they have been good, top 30 nationally. But if you look at Big 12 only games, which it is a smaller sample size, it is just 6 games. So maybe you take the overall more than just those 6 games. You could also view it, though, and say, well, the 6 games matter more because they're against more consistent, better competition. I don't know. But they have been below average nationally in their 2-point defense in Big 12 only games. And if you look at those Big 12 only games, TCU ranks just 15th of the 16 teams in the Big 12 in 2-point defense. They're allowing 56% on 2-point shots, and they have overall been a lower half defense by defensive efficiency in conference-only games. The last one, they also don't really shoot a lot of threes, and they give up a lot of attempts. So going back to the idea of the three-point stuff, even though they're shooting it well in conference-only games, they're not taking a ton of them, and teams are getting a good amount off. So we'll see what that means for this matchup between Kansas and TCU. Let's get into more specific matchups that could determine the game, players to watch on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. And our episode's brought to you by PrizePicks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, PrizePicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or the regular season, PrizePicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with PrizePicks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players. And if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. You can even do cross sport, right? You can do Patrick Mahomes more passing yards, or you want to do more rushing yards, combined with Josh Allen, more rushing yards, combined with DeJuan Harris, more assists. And you put that together, bada bing, bada boom. Hopefully it wins for you. Ready to run your game this football, basketball, whatever sports season. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 app. That's like $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to the Everydayers catching each and every show. Thank you to you for listening. Don't forget to check out Locked On College Football for a recap of everything that's gone on post-national championship game, or Locked On College Basketball, as I guess now officially from the collegiate perspective, we are in college basketball full-on season. At KU, we're always in college basketball season, but you know, the wider masses are now officially there. Okay, matchups of the game, Kansas and TCU. Number 1, get out in transition. If Kansas is playing small, which they're going to have to more without KJ Adams, right? Even though I know AJ Storr is like the same height as KJ Adams, but like it's this, for me, when you say playing small, it's more about the style of play. Like, are you playing 4 guards versus, even though KJ is the same height as AJ Storr, it's like you're playing 2 bigs, right? But anyway, if you're going to be playing small more, it behooves you to get out and transition more, right? If you're faster, if you have more players that can operate in transition, you want to be in transition more, right? And Kansas has been good all season long in scoring in transition. They average a good amount of points in transition per game. But so far in their conference games, the transition numbers have dipped a pretty good amount for KU. And part of that is the opponents, right? You're playing teams in Big 12 play like your Cincinnati's or Iowa State's, right? Teams that are connected on the defensive end, teams that are going to do a better job of playing transition defense. So, like, that's part of it. But KU does need to get back to that. And enter TCU, who's given up around 11 fast break points per game. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. It puts them in the bottom third, basically, the bottom 28% of all of college basketball. So they haven't been too hot at preventing opponents in transition play. So back to KU if they're playing small, which they're probably going to do more than without KJ Adams. Now, there's not a guarantee how much more because we just saw Flory play, 25 minutes against K-State. But AJ Storr is a much better player in transition when he's able to get downhill. I think AJ Storr is, I don't always trust AJ Storr selection in the half court. I usually trust his shot selection in the full court or in the transition play because he's usually good at those shots. When you look at Rylan Griffen and AJ Storr, or I'm sorry, not AJ Storr. When you look at Rylan Griffen and Zeke Mayo, both of them can hurt teams with their transition 3-point play, right? And so there are reasons that if you're playing small, these guys are playing more minutes, that's going to hurt you. And I've mentioned this before. Hunter Dickinson is an excellent fast break starter, an excellent outlet passer that starts those fast breaks, right? So there's reason to believe Kansas can get back to that score here, stay away from the half-court defense where, again, they're top 30 unit nationally, and get out in transition. Number 2 is make your corner threes. TCU gives up a bunch of corner threes, but they're allowing, not a super high percentage overall on the season from 3-point range. From the corner, they are allowing a pretty high percentage of threes this season. So teams are shooting over 36% from the corner from 3 against TCU. It's the above the break threes where teams have struggled against the Horned Frogs. And TCU is allowing a rate of corner threes at a top 7 percentile nationally. Basically, they are one of the highest numbers of the amount of shots teams are getting against them coming from the corner. So you have to be ready to shoot corner threes when you play TCU. Well, Kansas has been below average in the amount of corner threes they're taking. But without KJ Adams, maybe that's something that can go up, right? Maybe that's part of it. And the thing is, Kansas is actually, even though they haven't shot necessarily a super high volume, they've shot them well when they've shot them. Kansas is really struggling from the above the break threes. Kansas is only shooting 26% on above the break threes right now this season, but they've shot them at almost a 36% clip from the corner so far this season. Now, overall, Kansas has been pretty ice cold in Big 12 play. They're shooting below 30% from 3 in Big 12 play, but you're going to get chances from the corner. You need to take advantage. For what it's worth, Zeke Mayo does lead Kansas in corner 3-point attempts per game at 1.8 per game. He's shooting them at 36%, so that's a pretty good number. But no one else for Kansas is getting more than 0.8 per game. So somebody's going to need to see a couple corner threes go up in this one. Number 3 is contest shots at the rim. Just don't give up easy layups. The reason why, TCU has been horrendous, honestly, at shooting at the rim. Like, that's not hyperbole. I'll get into the numbers here in a second. You don't need to block a bunch of shots. If you block them, great. But you don't need to block or alter a bunch of shots. Just be there and make them shoot over you. Don't foul them. You don't have to get a block again. If you do, great. Just make them shoot over you because they have really struggled here on the season. TCU ranks in the top quarter of college basketball, which there's like 360 something teams. So basically that means you're top 90 nationally in the amount of field goals that they get being shots at the rim. But the problem, so even though they're shooting a lot at the rim, the problem in Big 12 play, TCU is only shooting 50.8% on shots at the rim. That puts them in the first percentile nationally. You might not understand the percentiles, and when I throw those numbers out there, I apologize if you don't. But basically, this is what it means. If they're in the first percentile, 99% of college basketball is better than them during conference play at shooting shots at the rim. So, like, they have been basically as bad as it gets shooting at the rim, okay? And even if we extend it out to full season stats and we further ourselves from just the 6-game sample size of Big 12 play, they're still only in the 18th percentile shooting at the rim. So, like, they're still not good. Don't foul. Don't give up wide open layups. Don't give up easy bunnies. Be there to contest, but don't foul them and just make them go over you, okay? Who are our players to watch, though? What's our player matchup? We'll get to that next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's a convenient opportunity. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege, promo code SPACE80 or SPACE80. Finishing up on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks with KUTCU Preview, we will have a KUTCU recap on your Wednesday night coming into your Thursday morning. So stick around after the game. Usually comes out 30, 45 minutes, I would say, after the game ends. So be on the lookout for that between KU and TCU. All right, players to watch for this one. Let's start with our player matchup. We mentioned Ernest Udeh, former Jayhawk, Hunter Dickinson. There's just too many storylines, but also two good players here and an interesting matchup of, Hunter, who's this great offensive center, versus Ernest, who is this great defensive center. So when you look at Udeh, he rates really highly on a lot of metrics in terms of his defense. His stats look good. The eye test looks good. He's lengthy. He has a super long wingspan. He's a good defender, right? And Hunter Dickinson, obviously, is a very talented offensive piece coming off an excellent game against Kansas State. So can Udeh bother Hunter Dickinson in this one and, make him less efficient? Because as I mentioned, that Kansas State game was just the second time, and thank you to Everydayers if you caught this in our takeaways on Monday episode, then you would have already known this, but that was just the second time all season long that Hunter Dickinson in Big 12 play has shot 45% or better from the field, which is like, not something like, hey, you want your big man shooting above 50%, right? You go back to last year's matchup. These two teams met in Allen Fieldhouse, and this is another interesting part, I think, between this one was that matchup. So Kansas ends up winning that game 83-81. And if you remember, there was a controversial flagrant foul toward the end of the game. It was called on Ernest Udeh. I believe it was hitting into Hunter Dickinson, and Dickinson had a phenomenal game. Finished with 30 points for the game, 11 of 17 from 2 of 3 from 3s. Now, I don't really have confidence that he's going to hit 2 threes right now, the way that stroke's looking, but he also had 11 rebounds in the game. Hunter was phenomenal for KU in that win over TCU. So you have that one. And then on top of it, like you just go back 2 years ago, Ernest Udeh, if Kansas doesn't bring in Hunter Dickinson, he might still be a Jayhawk right now. Like, I don't know. Who knows what happens this past offseason, right? But the reason he left is because Hunter came in and he wasn't going to be in line for a bunch of minutes anymore, right? So there's a lot of, I think, wrinkles and storylines and tangling between these two players that I think is going to make it for certainly a very interesting matchup. Now, high on the go-off meter, we're going to go with Rylan Griffen. Why go with a guy who didn't take a shot last game, played 12 minutes, didn't score a point? Well, we mentioned Zeke Mayo leads Kansas in terms of corner threes per game. Rylan Griffin's second on the team in 0.8 corner threes per game. That's not very much, obviously, but if you take into account that he's playing less minutes than Zeke, and if you look at maybe like per 40 numbers, it gets a little bit closer in terms of how often they're taken. But here's what I find is interesting. Rylan Griffen shot corner threes very well, which makes sense. You think of him as being a good shooter. Rylan Griffen is shooting corner threes at a 40% clip this season. So a team that gives up a lot of corner threes, I can't help but think that Bill Self and KU aren't going to be like, hey, Rylan Griffen, be ready to shoot, 3 corner threes tonight or something like that, right? That would be a plus against a team who gives them up. And Rylan Griffen could easily go 2 of 3 on those opportunities in this game, and that could swing a game like this on the road. Then in regards to TCU's transition defense that hasn't been very good this season, Rylan Griffen gets almost a quarter of his shot attempts in transition. Rylan Griffen ranks 93rd percentile this season in field goal attempts that come, the percentage of his field goal attempts, I should say, that come in transition, right? Not just the percentage of the shots he gets up coming in transition. So, that's a majority of where his shots come up. Both of those are reasons to think he fits into this matchup pretty well. And I get it. He didn't play much in the Kansas State game, but I think part of that was matchup dependent. Part of it was head scratching, and I don't have a great explanation, and that does scare me for this matchup that, I don't know what's going on totally, but also a lot of it I think was as simple as K-State's playing 2 bigs, and when KU did try more of the smaller lineups, they couldn't stop, the 2 big lineup necessarily. And so I think in this matchup where TCU is more playing, 6'7", 6'8" on the wing at the 4 position, where it's a little bit more doable to play the 4 guards, I think Rylan Griffen will get more minutes in this game. And I think knowing some of the things TCU gives up, he profiles really well as being somebody who should be able to have a strong game. Plus, he's somebody from Texas This game's being played in the Dallas area. So a lot of reasons that I like Rylan Griffen in this one. And, it's on a different scale, right? If I say Hunter Dickinson's on the go-off meter, that could mean 20 points. Rylan Griffen, probably not 20 points, but could it mean 10 points? Could it mean 11 points with 3 threes or something like that? Yeah, and I think that would classify as a big game, and certainly to try to help KU get one on the road in Fort Worth. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast. Stay with us after the game for a post-game recap. See you then.